Good evening, I'm Elizabeth Vargas. David is away on assignment. When you were shopping around for colleges, you maybe thought about the school's academics, athletics, even alcohol policy. But you probably didn't think about whether or not guns are allowed on campus. Tonight, one family says it wishes it had because what happened resulted in death and a murder trial with a new one scheduled for next month. Here's Matt Gutman.
Its motto is, the world looks different from here, and it does. Northern Arizona University sits 7,000 feet in the air, surrounded by the snow-capped San Francisco peaks and a ponderosa pine forest here in Flagstaff, Arizona. Plenty of wide-open spaces for any kid looking to strike out on his own.
There's so much to do. You have Sedona, Grand Canyon, the mountain.
Flagstaff is really homey. It's got a comfortable, welcoming feel to it. NAU, same thing. I mean, Flagstaff and NAU, they're not separate. It's just all one big community, I'd say.
NAU is one of 3 state schools in Arizona. It's got about 20,000 students, but it has a very close-knit feel among the students on campus.
One of those students who arrives as a freshman in the fall of 2013 is 18-year-old Colin Brew, here to study business.
And how did he come to choose NAU?
He applied to CSU, Boulder, and NAU.
Yeah.
And NAU was the furthest away, so that's why he picked that one. Because he just wanted to be away from home and just wanted to be on his own and independent.
Colin is the second of the 3 sons of Claudia and Doug Brew, and they drop him off 10.5 hours away from their Colorado home. But certain that, at least in this idyllic place, he'll be safe.
Looking around this campus, can you tell why he liked it so much, why he was so attracted to it here?
Well, it's a great community. It's a beautiful community.
At first, it seems Colin is suffering from the all-too-familiar fall freshman blues.
He would always kid me, I'm not going to be homesick. I can't wait to go. And 2 months later, I think I made a mistake. I want to come home.
But the jitters start to fade once Colin begins making friends, like fellow freshman Nick Peering.
We became random roommates freshman year in the dorms. And I met his family the first day. Just became really close right off the bat.
Would you say he was your best friend?
One of my best friends, for sure, definitely. We ended up rushing the fraternity second semester.
Kyle Zintek also meets Colin at that fraternity.
Well, you're smiling, you're grinning, so...
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about just the kid's like heart, honestly. The smirk that he always had too, just was I don't know, that kid had something just about him.
The boys join the Delta Chi fraternity at NAU, a school where Greek life is big on campus, the people, the programs, and of course the parties. Parties like this one, shot by an NAU student. That's the part that worries Colin's parents.
What was your impression?
I kept thinking, like Animal House. Because that's all I really knew.
That paints a picture.
I wasn't happy about it, but I told him he could make those decisions.
And that was your whole philosophy, bringing up the kids, right? When you're in my house, I'm going to take care of you, you're going to be safe, but when you go off to college...
You're going to explore, you're going to make mistakes that you're going to live by.
By sophomore year, Colin and his friend Nick move off campus to this apartment complex known as the Courtyard. It's a popular spot for Delta Chi, housing several of their fraternity brothers, and is conveniently located just across the street from NAU.
We had the whole little courtyard, so we could go out there, maybe, you know, just get together, play some beer games or something.
It had sort of a reputation at the time for being a place to party and hang out. Police were often visiting the courtyard, getting noise complaints, getting complaints of students drinking.
Were you concerned that Colin would go off to college and start just partying his face off?
I was always concerned about that, and of course I didn't like it. But I knew in the end he would get it out.
But before he would get the opportunity to do that, tragedy strikes on campus.
NAU has been in existence for 118 years, and for 116 of those years, there had never been a shooting on campus. That changed on the night of October 9th, 2015.
The night starts out like so many others, with a party at the Courtyard.
What are you guys doing that night?
We were just hanging out. Just a couple people drinking. Just Thursday night. It wasn't anything crazy.
Do you guys even know what started everything?
No, I don't know what happened, how it started.
Around 1 a.m., Kyle and Nick, along with several other people at the party, say they hear what sounds like an argument going on right in front of the courtyard.
It wasn't a memorable night. I mean, until everything went south.
Zach Volpo and Nick Pletke are also Delta Chi brothers who are at the party that night.
There's a verbal confrontation going on in the street. All of a sudden, I see the group move into the parking lot. That's when I saw the flashlight flick on.
Do you remember ever seeing the gun?
I remember seeing a light. I thought it was a security guard or a cop or something. I had no idea.
I looked down for a second, and all of a sudden I hear 3, 4 loud, really, really loud bangs. I thought it was fireworks or something.
Zach runs across the street into the NAU parking lot, and he's horrified. Colin Brew and Nick Peering are down, both of them bleeding on the ground, each of them shot twice.
I was in so much shock, I had no idea. Until I saw a puddle of blood next to me. And
the only person I didn't recognize was the one standing, and realized that he was the gunman. Immediately turn around, book it back, try to find some cover. When I saw this blinding light, it kind of clicked with me that something's not right.
The shooter fires off several more rounds, this time hitting Delta Chi brother Nick Prado and Kyle Zintek.
How do you get shot in the back?
I turned around when I saw that light. Next thing I know, on the ground, and it's like all numb.
Is there an ambulance coming?
When we come back, how did a college party turn into a war zone? As police arrive, they confront the teenage shooter. Body cameras capturing all the action.
Thank you. I'm so scared. Can I call my mom?
And you'll be shocked when you learn who that shooter is. Stay with us.
There's a guy outside and he's shooting people. My boyfriend shot in the neck.
Do you have a shooter over there? One male, actively shooting.
I copy, he is bleeding.
Is our suspect in custody?
There's people down.
I didn't know what was going on until I realized I was bleeding out on the floor.
Had you ever seen a gun on campus?
No, I've never seen a gun on campus until that night.
Are there any smells or sounds that you remember?
Screaming. I know there was a lot of commotion.
In that first blast of gunfire, junior Colin Brew is shot in the chest and in the shoulder, and Nick Peering is shot in the shoulder and the hip.
I could see Colin from where I was, and I was yelling 911, like someone call 911.
The parking lot where the shooting took place, there's a dormitory that overlooks it, and a lot of people had their windows open so they could hear what was happening.
So you are second floor up, second window in, right
yes.
there? Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, that's as close as you can get. That's within spitting distance.
The gunshots were pretty apparent.
Mikey Scollard, a sophomore at NAU, jumps from her bed and runs down to the parking lot into a crowd she doesn't know with bullets still flying. You begin to see people on the ground here.
Yes, and the first person I see is Nick. He's laying here, and I'm like, where are you hit? And he's like, my shoulder, and I see his shirt, and he's had a pretty big bullet wound there, so I put my left palm on his shoulder.
What Mikey doesn't quite realize is that at this moment, the shooter is still on the scene, right behind her.
Before you know it, there's more gunshots. And
you're literally administering first aid to somebody who'd been shot.
Yes.
And then you hear gunshots behind you.
And I hear gunshots again, and I said, he's still shooting, don't move, don't scream.
That is when the two fraternity brothers, Nick Prado and Kyle Zintek, were hit.
Afterwards, I remember looking to my left, and the boys that I now know from the shooting were screaming, stop shooting, stop shooting. And I remember one saying, he dropped the gun, he dropped the gun. Before you knew it, we had officers on all of us with guns on our faces.
Male subject armed with unknown firearm, code 3.
NAU police begin arriving with body cameras rolling.
So I got one here with a gunshot wound to the chest.
Every second of the aftermath caught on tape.
Check that kid right there.
6 or 4 multiple victims. I'm going to need at least 3 or 4 ambulances at least.
This video shows the chaos still unfolding. The young boys bleeding, lying shot on the ground. Mikey Scollard applying pressure to Nick Peering's wounds.
He hit.
And on the other side right there, a quick glimpse of a frantic 18-year-old on the ground, but this one is being handcuffed.
Turn around. On the ground. On the ground. Please go help him, officer, please. Please. Please go help him, please. Please go help him. Help me, I'm so scared. I have one detained. He identified himself as a shooter.
The hysterical student on that body cam is NAU freshman Stephen Jones. He'd only been on campus a few weeks.
Please, I'm so scared. I want my mom. Stand up. Is your name Stephen? Yes, sir. Have a seat. Oh, God. Oh, my gosh. Have a seat. Have a seat. Please. Have a seat.
It's just a very, very raw moment, which obviously he probably doesn't know he's being recorded.
I have a suspect in the back of my car right there. Someone needs to stay with him. You identified yourself to me as the shooter.
Nobody else. None of my friends.
There's nobody else involved.
No, nobody but me. I take all the responsibility.
Okay. So you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to the presence of...
Officers begin securing the scene, searching through the nearby dorm, and outside, paramedics work to save the 4 badly injured college students.
And I was just looking up in the sky, just, I think, screaming in pain.
What were you able to see?
I could just see Colin, like, in the rocks at that point and just unconscious. I remember yelling at the paramedics to go help him. I guess there was nothing they could do for him, so.
20-year-old Colin Brew lay dead on the ground, while his 3 fraternity brothers are raced to the hospital with multiple gunshot wounds. But in the back of that squad car, the suspect, Stephen Jones, isn't acting like a deranged rampage shooter, more like a distraught kid.
Oh my God. How bad are they here? I don't know yet.
Repeatedly begging for his mom.
I'm so scared. Can I call my mom?
We'll call your mom for you. We'll just got to figure all this stuff out first, okay? Stand by with me.
500 miles away in Colorado, another mother and father are about to get devastating news.
We really never talk about that day together.
Even to each other?
Mm-mm.
Our youngest, Doug, came down and he had gotten a text that there was a shooting at NAU. First thing I did was text him.
What time is this?
6:23 in the morning.
You remember the exact time of day?
Mm-hmm. I called the Flagstaff police, and they said NAU police were handling it. So I got to the NAU person that was handling it, and she told me Colin had passed.
It was just like a bad dream, and I kept thinking, this isn't real. Like, this can't be.
And then what's your next move? Do you try to fly right away to Flagstaff?
You don't move. You don't move. Everything stops around you. Everything.
While Claudia and Doug Brew descend into a paralysis of pain, the community of Flagstaff is reeling, trying to understand how this could happen here and why. Did you know at the time that night that it was a student who had done the shooting?
I had no idea.
All right, come on out.
But it is a student. When he's led into a police interrogation room,
You can just have a seat over there in that chair.
cameras continue to roll. The college freshman with blood on his hands, literally.
That's fine. That's fine, Stephen.
What happened tonight?
But was this terrified teenage gunman actually fighting for his own life? The story he tells police and the blurred lines between murder and self-defense, up next. As the sun rises over the city of Flagstaff, the media descends.
One person dead and the gunman in custody after shooting on campus at Northern Arizona University.
This is not going to be a normal day at NAU.
All the victims involved are NAU college students.
I immediately knew that this was a big story. This wasn't your traditional school shooting. This was different.
What was your question?
The shooter is 18-year-old Stephen Jones. He identified himself to police right at the scene.
Stephen Jones had only been on campus about 3 weeks. School had just started.
He'd grown up in a middle-class family, suburb of Phoenix, homeschooled by his mother. He was having some trouble, apparently, adjusting to college, but was just beginning to make some friends.
You can just have a seat over there in that chair.
The distraught teenager is led into a tiny interrogation room, still handcuffed.
Put my hair on my face, please.
Shaken.
Are you gonna leave me in here alone?
And when he's finally able to see the blood on his hands,
That's fine.
horror at what they have allegedly done.
That's fine, Stephen. So put your hands together like this. There you go. Perfect.
What happened tonight? I don't think I should answer that without calling my dad first.
At first, reluctant, Stephen begins to describe a night that started out pretty tamely. He and some friends at another student's place off campus. There were girls and the video game Guitar Hero.
Did you guys imbibe on any alcoholic beverages? The girls were. They had beers. I had a sip of my friend's beer, but I knew I was driving and I couldn't afford to.
Jones says that after about half an hour, he and 3 of his freshman buddies, Jacob, Shay, and Hunter, want to head back to campus. He says they started walking towards Jones's red Mustang, parked in that lot across the street from the courtyard where that frat party, by now, is in full swing. But along the way, Jones says they lose track of their friend Hunter.
So the 3 freshmen are walking down here.
I went back to the scene with retired Dallas police chief and ABC News consultant David Brown.
And they lost a friend, and they go knock on that door.
It seems pretty innocent to me.
10 or 12 dudes came out. And they started like, what are you talking? Get the off our porch. And then we just decided to turn around and walk away.
There's one person who seems to be the lead aggressor, at least verbally.
Colin Brew is what witnesses are saying, is kind of the, leader of the pack.
What were they saying? I'm gonna kill you, like, but you couldn't fight to go back to the freshman dorms. They were obviously very drunk.
Toxicology reports will later prove that Colin Brew was, in fact, very drunk, more than 3 times the legal limit, and he also tested positive for marijuana and for Xanax.
These guys are retreating, they're backing up.
Right.
And it gets uglier and uglier until somewhere around here, this is where everything changes.
Right. Stephen Jones gets cold-cocked, unprovoked, hit in the face.
He just, like, rocked my world. Like, I had no idea what was going on. My glasses fell off. I could barely see.
Now, it's not clear who did throw that punch, but eyewitnesses all later confirm that it was not Colin Brew.
A reasonable person might think, yes, I might be seriously injured now. And so now I'm taking off running toward my car, trying to get away.
And that's exactly what he does.
Panic.
Jones tells police that as he retreats towards his red Mustang, he's pursued, chased into the parking lot. Police ask him to draw a map of his movements.
When I started running from here, they were right behind me. I was gonna die.
Now, your perceptions may be off kilter because you've just been cold-cocked. And maybe you think people are closer than they are. Maybe you're hearing noises louder than they really are. It can be that extreme when you're in fight or flight mode.
Although he's able to get the doors unlocked, Stephen says in his panic, he can't find his other key, the one that goes into the car's ignition. And that's the moment, Jones says, when he opens the glove compartment, pulls out his Glock 22 handgun, and gets out of the car.
I turned on the flashlight and I pointed at him. I said, I have a gun, don't move. And then...
Where were those 2 guys at that time?
I was right here in front of my car. And they said, I'm gonna kill you. And 2 of them ran at me as fast as they could.
Those 2 guys would turn out to be Colin Brew and Nick Peering. Jones says he was standing 2 or 3 feet in front of his car when he pulled the trigger.
He was running at me. He was staring right at me. He was saying he was going to kill me. I was afraid for my life.
Jones says after shooting Colin and Nick, the rest of the frat guys in the parking lot descend on him, pummeling him on the ground.
I grabbed my gun and I just put it in the air. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I wasn't even aiming at anybody.
How many rounds did you fire?
I don't know. I just remembered my training. My dad trained me.
He tells police his father, an NRA certified instructor, taught him to shoot at an early age.
I was trained to fire until it's not necessary to anymore.
And these photos from his social media accounts certainly paint the picture of a boy and his guns. But as it turns out, Stephen Jones was not breaking the law by having that gun locked in his car on campus.
The state universities don't permit guns on campus, with the exception of state law allows you to keep a gun in your car as long as it's not visible and it's locked up.
It's a detail that Colin's dad, Doug, just can't get past.
If there wasn't a gun on campus, period, we aren't sitting here. Colin's sitting here.
And that's what we have to change. All learning institutions should be weapon-free.
Back in that interrogation room, after more than 2 hours of questioning, at 4:40 in the morning, officers break the news to Jones about what happened to the boys he shot.
3 people in the hospital. 1 has passed away. I was just trying to...
His self-defense story notwithstanding, officers photographed Jones' injuries. His clothes are collected, and in a white disposable jumpsuit, the freshman who had been on campus less than a month is led off to jail, charged with first-degree murder. As a college campus mourns one of its own and a family prepares to bury a son, another family is preparing to mount a defense. Coming up, the trial of Stephen Jones, the college students he shot squaring off against him.
The interesting thing about this trial was just to have so many young people testify one after the other.
Why don't prosecutors believe his story of self-defense?
As compelling as he is in this interrogation tape, talking about how scared he was and why he did what he did, the authorities clearly believe they know something more.
The evidence.
The evidence in the Stephen Jones case, crime scene photos, bullet casings, that 9mm Glock 22 with its attachable flashlight.
So that's what it would look like.
All pieces of a puzzle that prosecutors hope will convince a jury that Stephen Jones was not in fear for his life when he fired his gun, but is in fact guilty of first-degree murder.
Things are quickly getting underway at the NAU shooting trial.
He's pleaded not guilty.
What is indisputable is that Jones's action that night left 1 young man dead and 3 others with injuries, both physical and emotional.
I mean, we've talked about it and we've shared feelings and stuff, but we don't talk about that night in particular. It's not something we really want to keep on the forefront of our minds.
But at trial, they'll be forced to confront what happened that night. In their opening statements, prosecutors and defense attorneys paint dramatically different pictures of what happened in that NAU parking lot.
To the victims, the defendant was an assassin emerging from the darkness, and they had no chance to protect themselves before the defendant unloaded 10 rounds from his gun.
Prosecutor Eamon Barker argues Stephen Jones was a calculating, cold-blooded killer.
The question for you during this trial will be, what was the defendant's intent when he shot these 4 unarmed victims?
It's a question the defense is eager to answer in its opening statement.
This is a case about an 18-year-old kid who had found himself in a situation where he was surrounded, bullied, threatened, and attacked, and did what he had to do to protect himself.
When the testimony begins, it does little to clarify what actually happened that night, or even how it all started.
People had vastly different stories of what they remembered or they saw or how many people were involved.
And remember, some of those young people were impaired that night, making memories murky.
Describe how many people you think you saw out there.
I want to say I saw about 4 or 5.
Probably around 8 people. Do you recall how many shots?
Maybe 2.
I believe it was 3 to 4.
And this theme of contradicting accounts will be a recurring one throughout the entire trial. Take the testimony of Jacob Mike, one of the 2 freshman friends who was with Stephen Jones that night.
I saw people fall on the ground, and then the light panned over me, I guess, and I put my hands up and I was like, it's me, Jacob.
What were you thinking?
I was scared.
Of who?
Stephen.
He says he never thought his life was being threatened by those drunken fraternity boys, but on cross-examination, defense attorneys remind him of a 911 call he made where he sounds terrified.
911? The phone's killing my friend. Where are you? Mountain View. What's going on there? Someone is attacking my friend.
And I was just hysterics and out of my mind, I guess.
Then there are the 3 surviving victims. Nick Peering testifies first, saying he never heard his friend Colin threaten Stephen Jones or saw him lunge at him. He also tells jurors that he witnessed Colin get gunned down, and it was only at that point that he ran towards him. But there's a problem with Nick's testimony, and the defense zeroes in.
You told the police a pretty different story that night, didn't you?
What did I tell them?
You told them that you ran up because you were trying to calm people down, correct?
Correct.
In fact, you told the police that you were, use your words, mainly trying to calm Colin down. Isn't that what you said?
That is correct.
Next on the stand is Nick Prado. He was shot in the neck during that second wave of gunfire and testifies he witnessed both Colin and Nick Peering also get shot.
Right after I watched Colin get shot, Nick Peering jumped in the air, and that's when I saw Nick Peering midair get hit.
But the defense lawyers score another point, highlighting an inconsistency from his original police interview. They read back his own words where he never mentioned seeing anyone get shot.
Well, let's take a look. It was hard to make out. Once I heard the gunshots, of course, I was looking over there to see what the hell happened. But you didn't say anything about seeing him get shot, did you?
No, I did not.
The defense is trying to do 2 things here. Number 1, highlight inconsistencies in these fraternity brothers' stories. And number 2, try and make their actions, their movements, seem as menacing as possible.
And that brings us to Kyle Zintek, the last of the gunshot victims to take the stand. He tells jurors he was shot twice while running away from Stephen Jones. But the defense has the goods yet again. Listen to what he told police.
You're asked, so in other words, were you running toward the shooter or away from the shooter?
Yes.
Could you please read your response to the jury?
I think I was running towards the shooter to get his gun.
3 key witnesses tripped up on cross-examination. But the most dramatic moment of the trial is still ahead. When we come back, what you almost never see, the defendant, Stephen Jones, taking the stand in his own defense.
Hello, my name is Stephen Jones.
Hear what he hopes will convince a jury that he is a victim, not a murderer. Stay with us.
Stand.
It is day 7 in Flagstaff, Arizona, and Stephen Jones may be either feeling lucky or desperate because he's about to do something rarely seen at a first-degree murder trial.
Your Honor, the defense calls Stephen Jones.
Right.
Take the stand in his own defense.
When Stephen Jones was called to the witness stand, it was incredibly quiet in court. You could hear a pin drop.
Hello, my name is Stephen Jones.
Jones begins by recounting for the jury about that scuffle in the street that turned deadly.
And there was screaming and yelling and stuff, and next thing I know, I just got punched. It just rocked my world.
What's the very next thing you remember?
And as I was getting back up, I felt someone behind me try to grab the back of my shirt, and I started running. They were saying stuff like, you know, get the back here, what the are you scared of?
He says he gets to his car, makes that split-second decision to grab his gun, and gets back out.
They were running as fast as they could, full force, looking me dead in the eye.
And then what's the very next thing that you remember?
I fired with my gun. I knew that if I waited even another split second, I'd get seriously hurt or die.
The parents of the boy who did die are apoplectic in the courtroom.
It was hard. It was hard for me to even be in that room. And you could just see how cold and just almost removed he was.
Kind of like a video game.
But did any part of you think, man, he's also a kid. He's 18 years old. This is a child.
I said his life was ruined as well.
And Jones' story on the stand isn't holding water for some others who are in the courtroom listening, namely his victims.
Nobody deserved to die that night, period. But would you say that Colin was the aggressor?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't even say it was an aggressive situation. It was a verbal argument, from what I could see.
There are people who say that Stephen Jones was just defending himself against a bunch of bullying frat guys.
That's his defense. Never even saw the kid until he came back with a gun, so.
And when it's the prosecution's turn to cross-examine Stephen Jones, they hammer him on that critical question of intent.
You were going to kill someone because you thought you were going to be killed, correct?
No, it was never my goal to kill someone.
What do you think happens when you shoot someone in the chest?
They get seriously hurt.
That's what you think happens every time?
Sometimes people who get shot in the chest die.
Right.
And then, taking a page right out of the defense attorney's playbook, they press him on exactly where he was when he fired his gun, returning to this police interview.
Got out of the car and stood in front of my car, maybe like 2-3 feet, like right in front of the door.
2 or 3 feet, he says, but the evidence shows that after getting out of his car, he actually walks over 90 feet towards Colin Brew before, he says, Colin charged him. Back in that parking lot, I saw for myself just how far Stephen Jones actually traveled from his car.
It was over 90 feet between him and the next closest person.
Big difference between a couple of steps and 90 feet. And that takes some time to cover.
Yes.
That's significant ground to cover.
Right. This is a lot of distance between where he was feeling pressure.
Right, it's seconds.
And where the next person was that would have been on top of him.
I mean, even if you're running that takes some time.
Yes.
The authorities clearly believe that he went those 90 feet in order to exact revenge, to kill someone, not, they believe, just to defend himself.
I didn't know how far away they were at the time.
All right, but you keep saying to the officers that you were right in front of your car, right?
Correct.
I mean, you say that again and again. So each time you were describing that, you were just wrong about it, right?
Correct.
Putting a defendant on the stand is always a risk. And when he has to admit a mistake, an error on a really important issue, that's a real danger for the defense.
Before Stephen Jones leaves the stand, his own attorneys are hoping to leave the jury with one lingering exchange.
Stephen, if you didn't fire your gun that night, do you believe you'd be sitting here today?
No.
Day 8, closing arguments, the defense implores jurors to put themselves in Jones's shoes.
If you're being tackled by a group of guys like this, drunk, outnumber you, they're clearly trying to get your gun. You don't have much more time before they're going to overpower you. What would you do?
And they remind the jury that under Arizona law, Stephen is justified in using deadly force if it is to protect himself from being seriously injured or killed. But prosecutor Eamon Barker tells jurors Jones' story is riddled with lies for one reason, because he's trying to bolster a bogus self-defense claim.
We know he was punched in the face, but what he did afterwards has nothing to do with self-defense and everything to do with retaliation.
Jurors head out to begin deliberations, and as the hours, then the days pass, 5 families are left to wait and to worry.
I know you're not in the mind frame of blaming.
The parents.
You blame the
I blame the
parents.
parents. I blame the parents. He was a young kid. He was taught to shoot silhouettes, not even like tin cans like you would think if you're teaching a kid. But this was the way he was raised, and he did what he was trained to do.
When we come back, the jury deciding the fate of Stephen Jones has a stunning message for the judge.
Mr. Foreperson.
And for us, too.
I was juror number 2 in the Stephen Jones trial.
When 2020 continues. It was supposed to be Judgment Day for 20-year-old Stephen Jones, facing life in prison if convicted of first-degree murder. But after 5 days of deliberations, the jury of 6 men and 6 women files back in with a shock for the court.
The jury has indicated that you do not feel that additional deliberations or assistance will help you in reaching a verdict. Is this correct?
The jury is hopelessly deadlocked.
This court is therefore going to declare a mistrial in this case.
Some breaking news coming in out of Flagstaff.
They tried, but just couldn't agree.
It's an inconceivable blow to Claudia and Doug Brew.
Disbelief, really just disbelief. Like, how could they hear all the evidence and not come back with a guilty verdict?
The key issue was, did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Stephen Jones committed a crime?
Juror Robert Nagel spoke only to 2020 after the mistrial.
In my opinion, the state did not prove their case.
When the jury first voted, most believed Stephen Jones was guilty of a crime. They just couldn't agree on what crime.
Some thought first-degree murder, some thought second-degree murder, some weren't sure.
But Nagel says he and several of his fellow jurors actually found Stephen Jones to be a more credible witness on the stand than the fraternity brothers.
I believe once that Colin Brew and Nick Peering came toward Stephen Jones, he had the right to protect himself.
And for that, he says, he believes Jones was justified in using deadly force.
Stephen Jones had absolutely no choice but to shoot Colin Brew. When I asked the question, hey, who would have shot these boys in this situation? 4 of us said we would.
By the end of deliberations, he says the jury was evenly split. Prosecutors intend to try Stephen Jones again, hoping they'll have better luck with a new jury. But the young men who survived that night are ready to move on.
A lot of us want to forget about it. I mean, obviously not forget about Colin and all that, but we kind of want to forget about, I don't know, just move past it, I guess I should say.
Have you prepared yourselves for the possibility that Stephen Jones may walk free?
No, I do not believe that in my heart for 1 minute. No. No, I believe that justice will prevail, so this doesn't happen to anyone else.
That retrial Claudia Brew wants is now scheduled to start this October. We contacted Stephen Jones and his family, but they declined to speak in advance of that trial. And that is our program for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. For David and all of us here at 2020, have a good night and a great weekend.